Beauty comes in all shapes, sizes, colors, and forms. My life is about bringing out that beauty in everything and helping others do the same. Hello everyone, my name is Jewel, the owner, designer, and creator behind Shabby Boutique. If you want to see how I make my creations, the products I use, and how you can create your own home decor from new, thrifted, or found items, then keep watching. The products I used in this project is DIY Cottage Colors in Anvil, Sweet Pickins Milk Paint in Flour Sack, Sweet Pickins Top Coat Final Finish in Matte, ReDesign with Prima Gold Wax in Eternal, French and Crown decor stamps of your choice, ink pad for stamping, Sweet Pickins Extra Bond, a napkin or other small paper to decoupage, small frame mold made from resin, clay, or plaster, rhinestone chain, various ribbons and or laces, rhinestone brooch or button of your choice, hot glue, Gorilla Glue, needle and thread, antique bronze feet, and Sweet Pickins beeswax in black. Okay, so for today we're going to start out with this galvanized tin vase. I thought it needed a little something. We are going to start off with the DIY Cottage Colors in Anvil and give it several coats. Now don't forget, with the DIY Cottage Colors paint, you do have to stir it every time you use it. Since it has a built-in top coat, that top coat will come to the surface and separate. We will be using Sweet Pickins Milk Paint on top of the DIY colors in the black. I want to add a coat of paint of some sort to use as kind of like a sealer or a primer. I do want the paint to crackle and chip, and I want the black to show through. Plus, having the coat of paint will also help the milk paint adhere to the tin. As usual, I will be using my hairdryer on high heat to dry the paint quickly. Since this does have the built-in top coat, it does take a little longer for it to dry even with the heat gun. Be careful if you do use a heat gun not to get it too close to the paint, because the paint does have that top coat in it, and therefore sometimes if you get it too hot, it will bubble up. I will be doing a total of 3 coats of the DIY paint, using my blow dryer to dry the paint in between each layer. Okay, after we do our third and final coat of the Cottage Colors in Anvil, we are now going to mix up our Sweet Pickins Milk Paint in the color Flour Sack. You mix this a 1-to-1 ratio with water. I like to use hot water if I'm looking for a smoother finish, because that way it takes all the lumps out of it. If you do want the lumps and bumps, feel free to use cold water to mix it. I like using these little wire whisks. It helps, again, to get all the lumps and bumps out for a smoother finish. Now remember, when mixing Sweet Pickins Milk Paint, you want to mix it for a full 2 minutes. And depending on the type of finish you're looking for, depends on the ratio of water to paint. If you do a 50-50 mix, you should get about the consistency of a melted milkshake. After you stir your Sweet Pickins Milk Paint for a solid 2 minutes, then you're going to want to let it set for a couple of minutes just so that it thickens up. This also helps keep it from separating as you're using it. Once a couple minutes has passed, you're going to want to go ahead and mix it again thoroughly. We are going to apply our first layer of the Flour Sack Sweet Pickins Milk Paint. If you do find that your paint is a little too thick and you're having a problem spreading it out, you can spray it slightly with a mister bottle, and that will help you smooth it out. Sometimes if you're painting over a slicker surface, the paint will kind of not want to adhere entirely, but that's fine. Dry it, and when you go over it with the second coat, it'll adhere just fine. As usual, I'm using my blow dryer to dry the paint quickly so that I can move on to the second coat. Now on for the second coat. If it has been a while since you did the last coat of paint, you may want to go back in and re-stir your paint just to make sure that it hasn't separated. And as you can tell on the second coat of paint, the paint is adhering just fine. It's just because the DIY paint has that built-in sealer, so it is a slightly glossy surface. And yet again, we will be using a hairdryer to dry the paint in between coats. As I'm drying it with my blow dryer, you can see that the paint is starting to crackle. That's exactly what we want. We want that black to show through and give it that perfect aged look. I do think it is so cool that it literally cracks right before your eyes. It's like magic. So when I first started creating this tin, I wanted to do it with the look of the old porcelain. So I wanted to keep that rim black. But I did notice as I was wiping it with the baby wipe that the paint was starting to come off. And then I got that little swipe of black on the white, and that's when it all changed. That's when I decided to do something else. I liked the way that black looked, so I went with it. And I just went ahead and added the black all the way around, just to give it a slight aged look. Sometimes those mistakes that you make actually turn into something better. You never know. Then I decided to go ahead and kind of run it around the edges and the corners. Again, just to give it some more of that aged look. I also kind of went over the corners and the edges and took just a little bit of the paint off with the wet distress. Not much, just a little, so you see a little more of that black poke through. Next, I just gave it a quick sand. That way, if there was any loose paint, it would come off, and it would just give it a smoother finish. I then take the same baby wipe and wipe off any of the dust. Okay, so this is where the vision changed. I was going to do something simple and then changed my mind, as I always do. So I decided to take this little mold of a picture frame. I had already run it in plaster, but now I'm just taking just regular white craft paint and doing a base coat on it. Now that I've dried the first coat with my blow dryer, again, I'm just going in and filling in any of the places that I missed. So I decide that I'm going to do the outside frame part in Sweet Pickins Milk Paint in Corabelle. And as usual, I'm mixing it in a 1-to-1 ratio. Since this is such a small amount, I'm just mixing it with the back of my brush, but I still stir it for a full 2 minutes. I am being careful not to get paint on the inner part of it because I want the white to be white. I will be decoupaging over top of it. And since I'm using a napkin that is really thin, if I get paint on that part that I'm decoupaging, you will see the paint bleed through. Then I'm going to go back in with the white paint and touch up any of the spots that I got the Corabelle on. I will be using Sweet Pickins Extra Bond, as my decoupage medium. It has a sticky texture like Mod Podge, only it has a thinner consistency, which actually makes it a little easier to decoupage with. Now I'm taking my napkin and I'm placing it over top of the little picture frame to see where exactly I want it to go. Then I take my fingernail and run it around the edge so I know where to cut it out at. And if you flip it over where you just see the white, it's a little easier to see where your lines are that you made with your fingernail. I know some people will pull their plies apart before they cut them out. I find it much easier to go ahead and cut it out first and then take my plies apart, because with having the plies together, it's a little stiffer, so it's a little easier to handle, and you don't take the chance of ripping it as much. I'm just making sure it fits in there okay. But then I realized that there's a lot of white around the bird and I want to kind of pick up some more color. So I'm actually going to take another piece of the napkin that has the writing and a little bit of the buds on it that match that Corabelle paint. And I'm actually going to decoupage that on first and then decoupage the bird over top of it. So I'm just trimming it down to make sure it fits. Now I'm pulling my plies apart and I'm only taking the ply that has the ink on it. So I put it in place and then hold it down with my fingers as I start adding the Sweet Pickins Extra Bond as my decoupage medium. I just start at one end very carefully because the napkins are very thin. Then I add the medium to the rest of it. And then use my brush to smooth it out. Adding more of the Extra Bond to the top of the napkin. You can see I run my brush over it several times, and I'm just making sure that not only am I adding enough decoupage medium on to make sure that it adheres down well, but I'm also using my brush to kind of smooth it out and make sure there's no wrinkles. Now I'm taking my blow dryer again on high heat and I'm drying it so that I can put the second layer with the bird on it. I'm just making sure that it's thoroughly dry and that everything is adhered properly. I'm going to go ahead and use my fingernails and just kind of tear the edges around the bird and then decoupage that part on. I do use my thumbnail on my left hand as kind of a guide to make sure that I don't tear actually into the bird, just directly around it. And now that I have the bird torn out, I'm going to go ahead and take that ply apart. And again, using just the top ply that has the ink, I'm going to put the little bird in place. And again, I'm going to hold it down and start a little bit of the medium to get it in place. And then once I get it where I want it, then I'm going to go ahead and add more of that Extra Bond underneath it. And start adhering it all down. Again, I'm using my brush to smooth it down as I go. When you're using your brush to smooth it out, make sure that you have enough of the medium that you have a slick surface. If it's too dry out, you'll wind up ripping your decoupage paper. Now that it's all dry, I'm going to add Sweet Pickins Final Finish Top Coat in Matte over top. Just like Mod Podge, the Extra Bond does have a little bit of a tackiness to it, so you do want to add a top coat to the top. Since Sweet Pickins products are all natural, you don't ever want to contaminate the original container, so I always pour any of my finishes or waxes or anything out and use them from a small container. I'm going over the whole thing, not just the decoupage center, because I want to make sure it has a good top coat on it. Now I'm adding more of that Sweet Pickins top coat in matte to my container so that I can go over the tin vase and give that a good top coat as well. Again, with the Sweet Pickins Final Finish top coat in matte, if you're looking for a matte finish, this does give you a true matte finish. I've tried polyacrylic matte finishes and they just have too much of a gloss for me. As I'm putting that top coat on, you can see that crackle popping out even more. And yet again, I'm using my blow dryer to dry it quickly so that I can move on to the next step. I turn it around and I look at all sides to decide which side I want to be the front. I want to have a good amount of crackle on it. Then I'm trying to decide where exactly I want to adhere that little frame that we decoupaged. Next, I'm going to take some Gorilla Glue and add it to the back, making sure to get it all the way to the edges. I just use my fingers to spread it, and again, make sure it gets all the way to the edges. And then I'm going to glue it on my tin vase. I very carefully place it where I want it and make sure that it's straight. I use my finger to remove any excess glue that may have squidgied out from underneath. Once I get it where I want it, I'm going to set it aside and let it dry. Once I decide what stamps I'm going to use, I'm going to take the Ranger Archival ink in the color Galvanized. I'm going to tap my stamps into the ink pad, place it on the tin, and then gently use my finger and tap around the stamp without moving it to make sure that I get a good image. Now, if it doesn't come out perfect, I'm fine with that because, again, I do want this to look aged and old. I did miss a spot, so I just set the stamp back down and just tapped over that area where I missed. Now I'm taking my second stamp and again tapping it onto the ink pad to get it loaded with ink. And then I very carefully place it down, holding it in place with one hand, and then using my fingers to press the image down into the paint. Again, if it's not perfect, that's fine. I don't mind. For one, that's how you know it's handmade. Also, it helps with giving it that aged look. And I just realized that the ink pad is called watering can, not galvanized. I don't know what I was thinking. So I have these antique bronze feet that you would normally put on like a wooden jewelry box. And I decided that I'm going to add them to the base. It'll give it a little more height, as well as give it a little something extra. Normally you would use little brad nails to put it on the jewelry box, but since this is metal, I'm just going to use Gorilla Glue and glue them on. I want to make sure that they're adhered well, but I also want to make sure that there isn't a bunch of glue coming out of those little holes. I always want to make sure that my pieces look finished, and so I try to make sure that there isn't a bunch of glue coming out from underneath things or glue strings or anything like that. And again, to make sure that the bottom looks finished, I'm just going to take some black craft glue and just paint the bottom. Originally, I was just going to paint the tin part, but then as I started painting it, I thought it looked weird not being all the same color, and I didn't like the look of the holes still being silver. So I eventually just went ahead and painted the whole bottom. I did give it 2 good coats of black on the bottom, and I do think that painting all of it rather than just the middle part looked much better and gave it more of a finished look. Then I made sure I finished it off with some more of that Sweet Pickins matte top coat. I went ahead and I added the rest of the black that was on my brush into that top coat. That way it wouldn't look gray or streaky. Sometimes black, when you put top coat over it, will get kind of a gray cast to it or kind of a white cast. And just to make sure it stayed black, I just mixed the remaining paint that was on my brush into that top coat. So now I'm just taking some Sweet Pickins beeswax in black, and I'm just going around the edges to give the frame some age. I'm just using a small brush because I can use that brush to kind of blend it out a little bit. I'm just going around the outside of the frame just to give it some shadowing so it pops a little more. And then I'm just taking a microfiber cloth and just kind of wiping off the excess and blending it in a little more. Then I'm taking the excess wax off the top of the frame so that the black wax will stay in the cracks and grooves. Now I'm just taking what little bit of wax is left on my brush around the inside of the frame, just kind of darken the edge around where the bird part is. Now I'm just taking that brush and just going around the edges, again just adding some shading and shadowing just to give it that aged look. Now I'm just taking my finger and helping to blend it in as well. Next I'll be taking my ReDesign with Prima Decor Wax in gold called Eternal, and I'm going to use that to highlight some of the areas on the tin vase. I just use my finger and I'm going to rub it around the top, just adding a little bit of that French country whimsy. This gold wax also matches the antique bronze feet that I put on the bottom, so it helps tie it together. Next, after I get the lip of the tin vase covered, I'm going to go in and hit the high points on the frame and give it some French country flair as well. Next, I thought it still needed something. So I pulled this rhinestone chain out of my stash, and I'm going to use my clippers and cut it. I'm just double checking since I cut it to make sure that it still fits okay. So this is how I roll. Every time I decide to do something and I'm going to make it just simple for once, I can't. My brain will not allow me. I always have to add some glam to everything that I do. I have to add gold wax, now some rhinestones, and by the end of it, it's not even anywhere near what it looks like. I'm happy with it, but I can never do anything simple. So now that I've made sure it fits properly, I'm just taking a little tacky glue and I'm running it right on the inside rim of that frame. And then I'm going to adhere the rhinestone chain to it. So what this originally was going to look like was I was going to paint it white with the crackle, give it some age, and then I was going to do a red grain sack stripe down the front, and then just do a simple little rooster stamp on the front and call it a day. Again, I'm happy with how it turned out. I think it turned out gorgeous, but it was definitely not what I intentionally started out with. So then after I got the rhinestones glued on, I realized it wasn't enough. I needed more. So I took this chiffon ribbon and decided that I was going to make a bow and put it on the top. I cut some dovetails on the ends, and then I found in my stash this gorgeous coral ribbon that matched the Sweet Pickins Corabelle like perfectly. So I threw that into the mix. Now I'm trying to find the center of the ribbon so that I can use needle and thread and gather it together. But as hard as I tried, I could not get it to crease so that I knew where the middle was. So I wound up taking a pencil and just drawing it on. Next, I take a needle and thread and I just give it a slight gather. I'm not doing an actual bow. It's just the appearance of a bow. Now that it's all gathered and I've tied off the end of my thread, I feel like the two ribbons aren't staying together properly, and I didn't like that. So I grabbed my glue gun and just added a little dot of glue just so that the bow stayed in place. Next, I go through my stash of rhinestone and pearl ribbons and buttons and try to figure out which one I think looks the best. So I noticed that the raw edge on the one side of the ribbon was wider than the other side, so I went ahead and pulled some threads just to go ahead and even that out. Because of the weight of the button, I went ahead and used Gorilla Glue in the center of the ribbon to attach it to the tin vase. I just wanted to make sure that it would adhere properly and stay adhered. And then after I attached it with the Gorilla Glue, I went ahead and added a little bit of hot glue to both sides just so it would go ahead and hold that down as the glue was drying. Now for the button itself, I'm taking Gorilla Glue and putting a little bit on there. I also add a little bit of hot glue. That way it'll hold it in place as the Gorilla Glue dries. Even though this tin vase didn't turn out with the intention that I originally had, I'm very happy with the end result. I love all the chippiness of the paint with the black showing through. I love all the rhinestones and the pearls. That little bird decoupage is absolutely adorable. And then the hand stamping just gives it that touch of handmade. I really think everything came together. But this is what I mean about sometimes those accidents turn into something great. And don't forget that you can get all of the Prima and Sweet Pickins products that I used on this project on my website, theshabbyboutique.etsy.com. Let me know what you think of this project, and if you have any questions or something in particular you would like to see me make, or a product in particular you would like to see me use, feel free to leave a comment below. Thank you ever so much for watching, and until we meet again, have a most serendipitous day. Hugs to all. Love, Jewel.